Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us this week for our midweek moment. Matthew 11:28-30 says this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Last week, Pastor Joe talked about prayer in his midweek moment, and we discussed how the idea of a safe place or prayer time with God daily is so crucial to your walk with God. It's something that you should have on a regular basis, and it should be evident in your life. Not because you're talking to people explaining how you had this great prayer moment or boasting about it, but it should be evident to people that you are spending time with God because you change. You are in tune with what God wants to do in your life, and it's very apparent to the people around you. Well, in 2021, this is actually a very difficult thing to accomplish at times, mainly because of the amount of constant stimulation that we have, constant watching movies, TV, our phones, our kids' appointments, our appointments, run into soccer practice. 2021 has set us up for a busy culture, and now that we're entering into a season where restrictions are lifting, we're rushing back into that old way of doing things. And so today I want to talk to you about the idea of rest. What Joe talked about last week is important in our discipline and our walk with God. But did you know that God also wants you to do those things? He wants to spend time with you because He wants to give you rest. God has the gift of rest waiting for you. For those of you who don't know this, and most of you wouldn't know this because it'd be weird if you did, but growing up, my mom would always say that I had the spiritual gift of nap. And I always thought it was funny, but the reason for that is because anytime, anywhere, if I was feeling tired and it was an appropriate time to sleep, I should say, I could sleep no problem, in the car, in church as a kid, not as an adult. But it was a family joke growing up that I could sleep anywhere. And so much so that even as I grew up and I met Beth, she ended up having a photo album on her phone called Johnny in Dreamland, and it's just pictures of me awkwardly asleep in public without me knowing that she's taking pictures. I think she takes pictures because she's just jealous of me, but nonetheless, that photo album is there. And unfortunately, it's there, but the truth is, our spiritual lives oftentimes find little rest. And in our spiritual lives, the gift of nap, or I should say the gift of rest, is readily available to us, and we need to take advantage of it. As our young adults group has been going through the 10 Commandments, there's one commandment, number 4, that I noticed as something that I think in 2021, across the board, most people find a hard time following this one. It's one that we've kind of, in 2021, just pushed to the side, and that is the commandment of the Sabbath. Commandment number 4 is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And when I read this, for whatever reason, I went, right, that's one of the 10 Commandments. We really do need to put some emphasis on this, so let's dig into it. What is Sabbath? Well, the word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to stop. Stop whatever you're doing and just listen to God. In the Jewish culture, Shabbat or Sabbath is one day a week where we literally stop, or they literally stop. They stop everything that they're doing. They stop working. They stop worrying. They stop wanting. They just take a second, a full day actually, and stop. Everything shuts down and no one does anything. They eat together, they relax, and they reflect on what God has done in their lives. That is Sabbath. In our culture, even as far as my grandparents and my parents and even me growing up as a kid in a small town, the idea of Sabbath was still somewhat practiced. Every Sunday we would go to church, we would come home, we would eat a meal, and we would take a nap, which is probably why I'm pretty good at it. But then right after that, we would go back to church for an evening service. And Sunday was completely consumed with things that reflected God. It was a day to worship God. It was a day to really spend time listening to God. And so much so that in that small town, most of the shops were closed up on Sunday. You could go to Tim Hortons maybe, but most of the stores were closed. And over time, that one day a week turned into one morning a week for God, where we would go to church, maybe a little bit of time after church, but then after that, we would go to soccer practice, or we would go see a movie, which, hey, we would go to the movie theaters sometimes on Sunday. And then eventually, we've gotten to a place where a lot of families are lucky if they show up maybe once every month, or at least, actually, we're lucky if a family attends a Sunday service every Sunday for 1 month. And I'm not here to make anybody feel guilty or worried about maybe you're a sinner if you're doing that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is God, for some reason, made that a command, and it's something that we need to consider and take into account when we're planning our weeks. In the Jewish culture, this is still taken extremely seriously to today. And in Jesus' day, people were intense about the Sabbath. In fact, Jesus one day was walking with his disciples through a grain field, and some of his disciples grabbed some grain and they rolled it in their hands and they ate it. Now, I don't know if that's even any good. I don't know. I've never tried it. Maybe you have. But the religious officials at the time saw this and got extremely angry at the disciples. They considered this a violation of God's commandment, and they would deem them sinners because of that simple act of rolling grain in their hands. And so Jesus had to address the disciples, or not the disciples, but the religious officials at the time, and said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And Jesus was addressing a serious legalism issue at that time. But what this man named John Mark Comer points out is, at that time, those people really did need to hear the second half of that command. Man was not made for the Sabbath. But today, we really need to take into account the first half, because our culture is the complete opposite of Jesus' culture in this respect. We need to consider the fact that Sabbath was made for man. In our culture, we don't stop. In fact, stopping and resting sometimes can be considered laziness and really looked down upon in our culture. The idea of taking a day off and resting in some circles in our country is just considered lazy and less than. In fact, some people say that they got to program their kids so that they can just keep up with the other kids in their class. They've got to have so many programs back to back to back. Their days are so long. They're so busy. We don't stop in our culture. The whole word soccer mom even just kind of paints a picture of, in my mind anyway, of a mom in a minivan rushing home, grabbing the kids, throwing them in the back seat along with some juice boxes, driving them to soccer practice, dropping them off, going to the supermarket, grabbing their food, coming back, dropping the groceries off at home, putting the kids to bed. It just sounds like that whole idea of soccer mom is this picture of busyness. And we see this in family movies as well, because studies have shown that most people in North America can relate to a family member, a father or a mother, who is busy and constantly running from point A to point B. And it just speaks so much to the place that we're at. And God has a gift for us in Sabbath. The idea of Sabbath is the idea of just taking a second and stopping. What I even find interesting is that God himself took time to rest. God, being the creator of the universe, took 6 days, created everything that we know today, and then on the seventh day, he rested. And I don't think that it was because God needed to rest, because we know God doesn't need to rest, but it's because God took in and let himself experience the things that he's created. And God designed us to need exactly what he did. God designed us to need that rest. And so on the seventh day, God has commanded us to stop, take in what God has done for you, take in what God has created, take in who God is, so that you can be refilled, rejuvenated, hear from God, and then go out and continue with strength for the next week. It's kind of like what Pastor Joe was saying last week, where he was talking about the need for finding your quiet place, your secret place, to just be with God. It's a time for us to refuel and recharge so that we can go and do what God has called us to do. And so this week, I challenge you to consider that. Consider the idea of Sabbath. Maybe this week, and again, I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty, maybe this week it's impossible for you to take a full day off, and I understand that. In fact, the last few weeks, I have had a difficult time planning in one day a week where I did nothing but worship God. But I encourage you, if you are at that place where you're like, I can't give a full day, consider giving moments each day, one moment each day where you stop everything, you turn off your phones, you turn off your screens, you go to your secret place, your quiet place, and you spend time with your Heavenly Father. I promise you that when you do that, you are going to find fulfillment, you're going to find rest in God, and that rest is going to fuel you moving forward. And the more you do that, I promise, the more the one day a week where you just spend time with God looks way more appealing. But that's all I have to say with Sabbath. A couple of announcements. This Sunday is Popsicle Sunday. We are going to be meeting in the foyer right after service. It's going to be a fun time just to hang out with our family, reconnect. Maybe this week, if you stick around, you might meet somebody that you haven't met in a while because of COVID. We're starting to come back to what we think is normal, and it's pretty exciting. As well, we want to encourage any parents who have kids that are going to be signed up for art camp. You have a week and a half left to sign up your kids, so make sure to register them online because the camp is August 16th to 19th, and we don't want them to miss it. Anyway, that's your midweek moment. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We'll see you next week.